this really is just a first step. And ultimately, yes, what you're describing as this kind of intelligence agency of Bittensor, I think is very accurate as far as what Patrol is going to be. We're operating on open source intel. So any data we collect is available for the public to consume. They just don't know how to consume it. And maybe they don't know how to correlate it. AI was definitely not new to the cybersecurity space, but it was certainly abnormal to use computer vision as a way to solve for that. And we would basically interpret executable code as a multi-dimensional point cloud and use computer vision to identify patterns there that aren't human readable. And so we would find malware that other solutions couldn't find. On a technical level, anybody who installed Bittensor 6.12.2 from PyPI, not the GitHub version, but the PyPI version, if they installed that, then they would be effectively compromised. And then if you used your wallet on the SDK with that version, then your funds would have been stolen.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Garrett Oetken, former CTO of the Opentensor Foundation, who's taking on decentralization's toughest challenges. After a major Bittensor SDK breach, Garrett spearheaded the creation of Patrol, a decentralized intelligence agency boosting cybersecurity and trust. He explores subnet governance, miner collaboration, and the balance between privacy and security, highlighting Bittensor's evolution and future potential. Now, back to Garrett with the 40th Ventura Labs podcast. Garrett, how you doing today?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. Let's start off with what your role was at OTF, the Opentensor Foundation. What were you doing there? What was your position?
Yeah, so I was the chief technology officer at the foundation. I worked there for a little over a year. And a lot of what I was doing was really kind of the behind the scenes management of aligning our teams together towards our mission. And really what we were doing at the foundation was preparing for Bittensor to become essentially self-sustaining, where we have this foundation that kind of fostered Bittensor to get to where it is today. And now we all see that kind of end result of dynamic tau. And there's a few other elements of decentralization and shared governance that we, that's still in the works. But that's really been our primary focus throughout the last year, has been kind of bringing our teams together to make sure we can provide the best tools, best experience, and most reliable chain to allow people to innovate on Bittensor and also pave the way for dynamic tau, which is now all common knowledge. But that whole year prior to that, we just, like, everyone was asking questions. There's a lot of there's just a lot of interest in this, and everyone was, curious about what it's going to be like. And there's a lot of kind of back and forth and shared kind of development and just discussion with the community. And it was a really cool time.
What would you say are some of the biggest roadblocks or pain points in Bittensor becoming fully self-sustaining? Detail was a big one, for example.
Mm-hmm.
What are some more, you think, going into the future?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that Detail solved was it kind of it started to reduce the need for politics and this kind of oligarchic sort of structure within Bittensor. The root network, or the root validators, actually had a very critical role at the stage that that Bittensor was in a year and a half ago. And it was necessary because they would vet subnets for whether or not they actually were doing something useful and adhered to the mission. And I think if we had started with Detail right off the bat, I don't think it would have been as successful. But after a while, the root network started to become a hindrance on the chain and on the ecosystem, where subnets were a little bit more in this almost permissive sort of environment, which is not in line with the mission of Bittensor. We wanted a success to be permissionless, and that's where Detail kind of ended up. I think that to go further into that mission, the chain itself needs to be decentralized. The governance of the chain itself also needs to be more decentralized. Right now, there's still the triumvirate in the Senate for chain upgrades and whatnot. I think, though, the number one biggest issue that the ecosystem faces right now is what to do about subnet governance, because there's a constant debate about the relationship between validators and subnet owners. Now, what do the validators do when the subnet owner abuses a hyperparameter or abuses some function of the subnet? But also, what does the subnet owner do when a validator is trying to hostilely take over a subnet for their own gain? It's a bit um, of a two-sided coin, and it's difficult to strike a balance as to like how governance should be done on Bittensor within a subnet. There's this kind of shared ownership of a subnet, but also there's the central command of a subnet at the same time. And I think that's the discussion that needs to be solved post detail, and I think that's what debates people are currently having.
And these were the type of problems you were looking to fix when you were at LTF. What are some of the highlights of working there, of things you contributed to and helped push to development?
Yeah, so like one example of a big one would be commit reveal. That was a feature that, to a layperson maybe is like uninteresting, but it really solved, or at least partially solved, this problem of weight copying, which for anyone who's maybe not familiar, uh, validators could make a lot of money being lazy by just copying the scores for miners that other validators set, and they would have really high consensus and high V trust, but wouldn't actually do anything, wouldn't host machines or do anything along those lines. And that was a really serious problem, actually threatened this ecosystem pretty heavily for a while. And commit reveal was this feature that we implemented where essentially when a validator sets weights on miners, the weight setting actually gets delayed to a point where it only gets revealed on chain after a certain point. And so essentially the validator would commit these weights at a certain point of time, and then like after an epoch or so, it would reveal those weights. And then so presumably the weight copying validator would always be behind the real validator, and that would result in them performing worse. And so, we had a couple different versions of that. The version we ended up in was really slick and didn't require the subnet owners to change any of their code whatsoever. And so that was something that we were really excited to roll out at the foundation. And there's a lot of projects like that that might seem like subtle features on the outside, but on the inside, those were major pushes that we had because they solved some really big problems. And that's something that um, kind of defines, I guess, a little bit of the difference between working inside the foundation versus working on a subnet or working on a validator or mining, and kind of what that Bittensor dynamic looks like. Is we were tackling problems like that in the foundation about how do you keep the network as a whole intact and functioning properly? How do you make this engine that hums? And so features like commit reveal were a big part of the pushes that we did, and of course dynamic tau was a big part of this. And then also the tools, not necessarily the chain features, but the tools like the Bittensor SDK, the Bittensor CLI. These are things that if you're a veteran on Bittensor that you're very familiar with. These are things that we worked really hard to improve so that they become just really useful and allow people to make subnets and to mine as easily as possible. Which a year and a half ago, there were a lot of a lot of complexities with building on Bittensor that we needed to cut through.
Another thing that happened during your time as CTO at OTF was the big hack and exploit of Bittensor. Can you walk me through what actually occurred there?
Yeah, so not quite a year ago, but yeah, about 10 or 11 months ago, we had a exploit with the Bittensor SDK where one of the API keys or the upload keys for PyPI, which is the Python package manager, was compromised, and uh, the um, the hacker, I guess you would say, intercepted a upgrade that we were doing. So we had launched Bittensor 6.12.2, um, and we launched that on the GitHub. There was a delay in the release of the actual GitHub package and the upload to PyPI. Normally that happens in about a few, like 10 minutes or so. This was delayed um, because of a chain upgrade that was happening by about 2 hours. Within that 2 hour window, the attacker intercepted the package on GitHub and uploaded their own version of it to PyPI that included a small feature within the wallet code to decrypt the user's keys and send them to a website of their choosing that was not owned by the foundation. And that allowed them to have access to private keys that they shouldn't have access to. And then they exfiltrated funds and then they stole millions of dollars worth of TAO.
So has there been any developments, I guess, in catching that person or people or organization? And then also, who did this affect when it occurred? It sounds like it affects primarily just subnet developers, but
Yeah, so on a technical level, anybody who installed Bittensor 6.12.2 from PyPI, not the GitHub version, but the PyPI version, if they installed that, then they would be um, effectively compromised. And then if you used your wallet on the SDK um, with that version, then your funds would have been stolen. So that ends up actually being a pretty small subset of people because um, usually people that are installing that version would be people that are only doing so because it's in the dependencies for a subnet. So a subnet developer might say, hey, there's a new Bittensor version. I'm going to support it, add it to the requirements file, and then a validator or a miner would then install that package. And then they have to install it and then also use their wallet via the SDK. So it's not going to affect the average user because most average users do not play with their wallet on the SDK for one, and also usually aren't eager to get the latest version as much as like a validator would. So most of the um, severely affected parties would be validators.
and this hack resulted in tens of thousands of TAL being essentially lost or stolen. How did this event inspire what you're doing with Control?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we started patrol really at that event, at that the hack that happened. I mean, we were um, heavily involved in the response to that. I'm working with Paul, who's the former CIO of Opentensor as well. He's here with us at Tensora, and I'm partnered up with a couple other guys from the foundation, and we were involved in uh, this response. And what we found was that finding out who did it, recovering funds, and going through all of that kind of post-attack action was really difficult, and it took a lot of time. It required some expertise from outside the team to come in and do the detective work and kind of figure out what the what the solution is to recovering funds, identifying the suspects and whatnot. And it was an investigation that took a long time. Now we have made significant progress in that. I don't want to disclose exactly all the details, but there's some public information out there. If you're curious enough, you can search for it. But yeah, I mean we've done a really good job with the investigation. I'll just say that, and and we've had a lot of success there, but it was definitely a painful process. And so when we looked at Patrol, Subnet 81, we were like, well, how do we solve this, and how do we take advantage of this thing we call Bittensor to do this and kind of make this easier for us, because it's a big task. Anyone who's been involved in cybersecurity or especially crypto-related cybersecurity knows that it's a big task and it can take a long time. And so we were thinking about how we can kind of chop this up in a way that's consumable for miners to contribute towards, and that's where we ended up with Patrol, where we create this relational graph. And we mentioned that it's kind of a decentralized Palantir, and we want to think of it as kind of a decentralized intelligence agency, in the sense of we can very easily, as users of this product, um, identify known wallet addresses, social media accounts, code repositories, et cetera, that are tied to a suspect's wallet. And that allows us to have this kind of um, this capability where within seconds you could arrive at the information that would have taken us days or weeks to acquire manually. And so we see this subnet really as a solution to something for us internally. Like, we want to use this tool. And then from there, using that intelligence to then be proactive and asking ourselves, like, how do we prevent this from happening again, as opposed to just reacting to something that's already happened.
And you mentioned Paul,
Mhm.
CIO, former CIO of Opentensor. How does your background and his background and what you guys were doing before Bittensor make you uniquely positioned to tackle this problem?
Yeah, great question. So Paul and I actually were partnered up on a previous project before this. We both co-founded a startup company that was in the AI space and cybersecurity. And what we were doing was using, and this gets a little bit into the nerdy territory here, but we were using computer vision to solve for malware detection and identification and classification. And uh, that was something that was kind of a interesting way to tackle the problem, because AI was definitely not new to the cybersecurity space, but it was certainly abnormal to use computer vision as a way to solve for that. And we would basically interpret executable code as a multi-dimensional point cloud and use computer vision to identify patterns there that aren't human readable. And so we would find malware that other solutions couldn't find, and we would find 0 days and things like that that would take every other solution on planet Earth like days or weeks to find. And we had a lot of success there iterating through R&D. And so when we came to the foundation, we naturally had this security mindset. We were immediately focused on security, and when we saw this vulnerability and we saw this hack that happened, we were immediately on top of it in terms of response, and our background both at this intersection of AI and security allowed us to kind of think about, well, how do we solve for this in the future, and how do we build those stepping stones, and that's what we're seeing here with Patrol.
And with Patrol, you guys often compare yourself to Palantir, and you also mentioned kind of like an intelligence agency. Is it fair to classify you guys as the intelligence agency of Bittensor? Is that how you view what you guys want to do?
I think ultimately, yes. I think anyone here who's looked at the Patrol code or has tried mining on it, will know that, like, it's currently focused exclusively within the Bittensor chain, and so there's some limitations there. But this really is just a first step, and ultimately, yes, what you're describing as this kind of intelligence agency of Bittensor, I think, is very accurate as far as what Patrol is going to be, and what our roadmap looks like as far as development and expansion. It doesn't stop at Bittensor in terms of our own security posture. Like, we're Bittensor first. That's our own backyard, so we're starting there. But Patrol really is about open source intel as a whole, expanding to other blockchains, but also other available information that we can grab and correlate. And I think that's the key element of Patrol.
And in current form of patrol, what miners do is essentially just track and store transaction histories on the Bittensor blockchain.
Yeah, essentially they're working towards constructing this large relational graph. So it's it is again, it's contained entirely within Bittensor, but it's more than just like storing like a list of events or a list of transactions. It's relating those to wallets. So essentially, like if you were to look at a payload for what a miner would return, they would return a nodes and edges, and the edges just connect the nodes together in a graph. And so what this would allow us to do is if you were to query a wallet, then instead of having to iterate through a database or through a or heaven forbid go through the actual chain itself and manually search for these things, you'd immediately know at your fingertips every wallet that wallet is related to and what kind of relationship it has. So a transaction, staking, a parent-child relationship, or any other form of relationship on Bittensor would be expressed as an edge that connected one wallet to another. And so when you query a wallet, you immediately know every wallet that one is related to, and then uh, when we expand to other chains, expand to other services and data sources, we'll just see this explode. Where you look at a wallet and it'll tell you, oh, that wallet's been mentioned by these Twitter accounts. Oh, that wallet's been mentioned in this GitHub repo. That wallet actually transacted across the bridge with an Ethereum wallet, and that Ethereum wallet might have its own relationships that we track as well. So it really starts to blow up once we expand our data sources.
And practically, how do you expand these data sources? Will it just be one chain at a time, or is it you'll eventually open it up to let miners decide which chains?
Yeah, it's a great question. So ultimately it comes a little bit down to the validation mechanism. Is if the miners contribute something, we need to make sure we can verify that that's legitimate. And so naturally, chain data is a lot easier for us to onboard because chain data is very easily verifiable. It's traceable data as opposed to just available by correlation. And so that's the easiest stuff for us to onboard. But it's not always the most important stuff for us to onboard. And so we're going to be rolling out these data sources as quickly as we can. Um, but we want to give the miners the flexibility to decide on where they want to focus because we understand that not every miner can swallow the entire world. And so this gives us an opportunity to let the miners kind of figure out for themselves where they want to stretch and where they want to dive into, where maybe someone is like really good at scraping data from Twitter or X, and maybe they have some blockchain data from the Bittensor side as well. So they're really good at that element of connecting social media to Bittensor wallet addresses, but maybe they're not as interested in exploring other chains like Ethereum or Bitcoin, and so they would have that option of kind of catering like to specific angles within Patrol, because Patrol is a very wide scale, right? There's a lot of data to cover, and the miners will have this opportunity to kind of choose for themselves of what's a priority for them. Now, of course, as a miner, the more data sources that you tackle and the better you do at that, then the more opportunities there are for you. But this is where the miners kind of get to participate into what's interesting for them as far as their contribution.
And the social media aspect, connecting that to wallets, how hard is that in practice to trace?
Yeah, so there's two like flavors, I guess. There's the easy way, and then there's like the much harder, but also much more valuable way. The easy way is if you just look for mentions. If a wallet address is mentioned on social media, that's low hanging fruit. Like most of the time, that's not interesting information, but that's low hanging fruit information. The more difficult data to grab would be in the space of event correlation, not event tracing. So you're not necessarily connecting the dots as concretely as you would with on-chain data, but you're kind of looking at the behavior of a wallet. You're looking at the behavior of accounts on X, and you're identifying a correlation that maybe has a dotted line connected to it as opposed to a solid line. And this is really tricky, but this is where we also start to bring in innovation with Patrol, and this is where the miners can contribute in a way that they haven't been able to yet.
What it sounds like to me is the KOL's time is running short because you could do something where you track the transaction right before a tweet, and if it happens 17 times in a row for this account and this wallet, it's probable that those are related, is how you would describe that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, behavioral analysis is something that's really interesting to us. And what's cool about AI, and this is something that we've seen in the malware detection side in our previous company, is that a lot of times the AI can find patterns that aren't intuitive to us as humans. So it might say, "Hey, these accounts are related. This wallet is related to this GitHub user." Um, and to us it might not seem immediately obvious, but to the model, it will it'll be able to make those correlations with very high confidence, and it's definitely a tricky problem. Like, I'm not going to say that this is an easy task, but this is where Bittensor comes in, right? This is where the miners can contribute to this in ways that maybe I even myself couldn't solve this problem. I mean, we're already seeing that with Patrol. Patrol miners are already better at mining Patrol than I could do myself, and that's really encouraging to see. It's a little bit scary as well, considering I didn't think I was so bad at mining Patrol personally, but uh, but they've really just what they've shown us time and time again, and we've seen this on the OTF side, kind of looking at it from a different side of the fence. But now that we are in this kind of subnet ownership position, we're saying that the miners are capable of doing really incredible stuff, and it's mind blowing to see just how much better they can be than the subnet owners themselves at mining, and that's where I'm excited to kind of explore this event correlation space.
Yeah, two questions that came to mind. How do you guys deal with centralized exchanges or tools that use like token shielding or tornado cash to kind of break this link of transactions? And then also, how do you allow for miners to innovate and keep your validation mechanism open enough to not be deterministic in how they operate?
Yeah, great question. So the centralized exchange is kind of a tricky one because it's impossible to see what goes on inside an centralized exchange unless you are partnered with that exchange. And I think that there are a couple ways we can tackle this. There's the political front of actually just getting inside an exchange, which is not something that we are expecting to do soon. But that is how other investigators actually get into that information, is they actually have a relationship with the exchange, and the exchange, usually in a collaboration with law enforcement, they'll actually allow you to look at their internal records and whatnot. Um, However, we want to keep things open source. We want to keep things, more analytical than more than on the prosecuting side. And so this is also a great use case for event correlation, where you can say, hey, I've got a bunch of inbound wallets going into this exchange. I've got a bunch of outbound wallets going out of an exchange. I'm looking at their patterns, and for one given inbound wallet that I'm interested in, I might identify a few wallets that are of similar patterns in terms of their behavior that I can then track and kind of keep a close eye on. It's not a it's not as easy to trace as regular on-chain data, but again, it's one of these behavioral recognition um, aspects that I think we can make some really good progress on, and I know that this really um, expands the vision for Patrol, and we've got we've got a roadmap that goes basically to infinity in terms of work, and I think that there are opportunities here to play with other subnets as well. Some subnets that we're also cooking up, but also other subnets within the space.
How important is it to operate with other subnets, and how can you define those partnerships to be beneficial to each party?
Yeah, so I look at it as like a subnet is a project or a problem space, and it's it doesn't make a lot of sense to like reiterate a already existing problem space when that problem is already being solved in another subnet. So I look at this from strictly a business and practical perspective. Is I don't want to dump resources into solving a problem that's already been solved. And so this is where partnerships with subnets becomes really natural. Where if let's take security out for a second. Let's just say I'm building an ML pipeline. I might own one piece of that pipeline, but someone else might own another piece. Let's just string that together. And we're already saying that on Bittensor, and it's really cool. But like for us with Patrol, like we're swallowing as much open source intel as we can. If that intel can be acquired through another subnet, or there's some analysis that can be done there, some model development that can be done there, there's some sort of boost to our mission that can be accomplished via another subnet, absolutely we're going to explore that. And we can explore that in some very creative ways where maybe our own miners are using the output of their miners to accomplish a task. And this is where Bittensor starts to kind of get this compounding effect of innovation where we can just keep like utilizing subnets into a stream and a pipeline as opposed to just these isolated products that have no relationship to each other. I think this is where shared innovation really starts to be like just really it starts to explode and become powerful.
And partnering with Tensora, or joining Tensora, who before was a very outspoken as we are a mining group, this is what we do. How has their experience as a mining group helped in the development of Patrol Subnet 81?
It's been fantastic, and I would actually extend this as a recommendation to anyone building a subnet is either develop a close relationship with a mining community or foster your own. When you have miners that really know what they're doing, like the Tensora team, it makes the quality of the subnet you're building that much better because nobody knows how to exploit a subnet like a miner does. And this kind of gets into the ugly side of Bittensor, but ultimately miners will do whatever they're incentivized to do, not necessarily whatever fits your mission and vision. And that could be a death sentence for your subnet, or it could be a superpower for your subnet, depending on how you react to it. And with us, we look at that as, hey, internally, if you were to evaluate the subnet objectively, how would you exploit this? Like that's what we asked before we even launched the subnet. We brought our mining team together and we said, like, how would you exploit this? And we ended up covering a lot of exploits before we ever released because of that. And we made the subnet a lot more robust as a result. And it's honestly like that is the way to do subnet development is identify all the ways that a subnet can be exploited, and as a subnet developer, subnet owner, you can sometimes anticipate some of that, but you're kind of already in this headspace of what you're trying to build, and so you're always going to have that bias of your mission, the happy path for your task. And so a miner that comes in from an objective perspective and their goal is to break it, they'll offer feedback that is invaluable. And so I'd recommend that to anyone building a subnet is connect with miners and get their feedback honestly and openly, and that's how you build really quality subnets. And so having them on as a mining team is invaluable for our subnet efforts.
And for you personally, what was the transition like from the public sector side of Bittensor, or public sector with OTF, to private sector now in making your own subnet?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it felt very natural because a lot of people from the foundation, they kind of leave the nest and kind of join the private sector of Bittensor. I mean, I was the CTO at Opentensor, but before then was Stefan, and he left the nest only a couple months after I had joined and started Macrocosmos, and we've seen this pretty frequently throughout Opentensor, and so it felt very natural to kind of explore this idea of like, well, what if I worked on this subnet project and kind of develop this and whatnot. And so with our partners, I mean, I was ideating on this for a couple months before I actually left the foundation. And I think one of the biggest shifts for me and for Paul as well, I think I feel comfortable speaking for him, is is that we kind of had to adjust our processing and our thinking from how do we make this best for the network as a whole to how do we make our own business successful and our own subnet successful. They're competing priorities, and that's always something that we're like, well, we could do this, but what if everyone did that? Would that be what would that look like on the ecosystem? What effect that would have? And we kind of have to unlearn that a little bit of like, well, okay, but what's the best move for us as a business, and what can we do to make our subnet successful? And we try to find that balance because we still have that element, and we still support OTF, where we can, and we still have that relationship. And so we, in some ways, I feel like I haven't really left OTF fully, but I think that that was the biggest like mental shift, is like moving away from what's best for everybody and moving towards how do I win this competition. So it's been fun.
And being on that private sector side of the fence now, do you see, well, when you're developing things, do you now have ideas of, oh, OTF should do this now?
Actually, yeah, that happens all the time. Well, we'll be faced with a problem and we're like, well, it'd be great if we had this on chain. I'm like, hold on one sec, let me message somebody. And it's you definitely have a newfound I have a newfound appreciation for the things that we have done at OTF, but it also gives me that much more clarity on the future of like what needs to exist on chain, what features need to exist, what things are broken, what things are not broken. Previously, a lot of that is really difficult to measure when you aren't a subnet owner, or you aren't a validator, or you aren't a miner. You're an engineer solving these problems, but you're not necessarily the one in the trenches doing those things. But now that we are those people, we can kind of have this new perspective of like just this clarity of like exactly what works and what doesn't work, and can work with OTF on solving that. So there's definitely some back and forth conversations about like, hey, is this really the right way we should do this holistically on chain? And there's a balancing act. Like there are sometimes a point where we just need to solve that problem and kind of work around the protocol, and there are some times where we say, hey, the protocol needs to change because here's a vulnerability, or here's a feature that might just be a nice feature to have, a really convenient that would be useful for everybody. And so that conversation happens quite frequently, actually, of like new ideas and new solutions.
And you've been on both sides of the fence for the detail launch. What have been your
Mhm.
thoughts on how detail has been thus far?
You know what? So far, I'd say Detail's been a massive success. It's resulted in good subnets getting the top slots, and having the most emissions. Um, I think that there's some work still to be done, and I think that there are a few things, especially as I mentioned earlier with subnet governance, that needs to be addressed. But overall, I mean, the launch itself went pretty darn smooth as far as launches go, and I'd say the outcome so far has been really positive. I think people are starting to learn how to play this game, and how not to play this game, and they're starting to learn how to become successful here. And it's a living system. It's an ever developing, ever evolving um, ecosystem. Uh, so the work is not done, but I would say so far, I mean, detail has gone remarkably well, and I would define this as the happy path of detail as far as what our internal expectations are concerned.
And you've mentioned the subnet governance point a few times now.
Mhm.
Do you think we'll ever see the ability for the subnet owner to lose his position?
Yeah, it's actually a conversation we've had quite a few times in the foundation. I struggle with that because, especially with the capability of validators to hostily take over a subnet, it brings in this larger question actually of who does own a subnet. I mean, yeah, you have the subnet owner who can change hyperparameters and they get 18%, but if all of the validators just said, we're going to run different code, okay, like yeah, there's a person who's going to get 18% of that output, but it is possible to kind of hostily take over a subnet in that sense. And we actually saw that in a positive sense with the Holocaust that happened with, I forget which subnet that was, but
Yeah, 28,
um,
old
yeah,
28.
yeah, 28. Yeah, and so they were, running a joke subnet, and OTF partnered with a bunch of other validators. Everyone child keyed to OTF, and OTF said, "Okay, here's the new validation code. Just reverse the script," and it worked. And so that's an example of where validator governance or validators becoming part of the governance model is really important. There's a flip side to that, though, is that what if the validators try to like boot a subnet owner out of their slot? And that's where I think it becomes kind of dangerous. Um, I do think that there needs to be kind of a path for that transition of like if I'm a subnet owner transitioning to someone else. I think that needs to be a little bit more smoothed out. But ultimately, I think it's pretty safe where things are at, where the subnet owner kind of keeps that slot, but the value of their coin could always go to zero. So there is always that risk amount for them. But I think that's an ongoing conversation, and where we ended up with that is where we're at now, which is, subnet owner kind of retains this position, but they also kind of have limited power within their subnet. So it's still community governed in some form or fashion.
And it's not a existential threat. It's just we'll see a lot of dead subnets with zero prices, and then maybe they
Hmm.
resell it to somebody else. So it would be more so just smoothing out that process of reselling a slot.
Yeah, I think so because we're seeing a lot of back end deals for subnet slots and over the counter deals, and I think that if there was an on-chain like protocol-based way to handle that, that'd be fantastic. Because yeah, exactly. I mean, if a subnet is dead and the subnet owner gives up, those slots will become in demand because the registration fee, might be more tau than is comfortable for a lot of essentially new startup companies. And so they might say, hey, I'll offer you half of what the current registration fee is. Or maybe there's something else to sweeten the deal, or of maybe, um, maybe the subnet owner has something else to offer, like some liquidity that, that might be more valuable to a new player than a new subnet slot. And so I think we're seeing a lot of action in that space, but it's all behind the scenes, and I'd love to see that become more protocol based.
And more specific to your subnet here, on a semi-related note, Tau.com has a validator now, which
Hmm.
is ex Bittensor Guru validator, but is one
Hmm.
of the top validators on the network. How does that validator work with, if at all, patrol your subnet?
Yeah, so we are validating on Patrol, and it's kind of a good entry point, I guess, to the productization of Patrol, where Patrol will have an API service and other services as well to access that data and start using it as an investigative tool. And a validator is a good way to kind of route that user traffic through to the miners, where the miners can service user requests directly. It's a pretty common model that we've seen in other subnets before. And I think that's a very clear immediate use case for the Tau.com validator. But I'd say more broadly speaking, the Tau.com validator, as its name suggests, is very much in service of the Tau.com product that we're launching soon. Um, I don't want to get too far into the details of that, but that's really the kind of the game plan long term for the validator is how it serves that use case.
And then long-term thinking here, how far out do you guys plan? You said you have a endless roadmap of things to add. What does the long-term goals look like? If we hit XYZ, we've been successful.
Yeah. So what I would say is like the high level is we want to be the decentralized intelligence agency. We have this open source platform that allows for kind of a non KYC KYC, um, and allows for improved trust. Ultimately, Patrol, it's something I think everybody can use that's interested in security. Um, but we're building it for Tau.com. We're building it for ourselves. And the key element there is trust. There's a big problem with Bittensor with other chains is that it's really difficult to trust individuals, to trust the chain itself, to trust where money's going. And I think that that's a roadblock that is hindering further development and further investment. And that's the ultimate problem that Patrol is trying to help solve. It's one element to this piece of trust. And I think building reputations for people on chain in still an anonymous fashion, but in a way that you can say, hey, this wallet, we don't know who it is, but this person is acting with a suspicious behavior. So we're going to give them a certain risk profile. Those kinds of things I think is really important to building trust on chain. So how we quantify trust would be difficult to say exactly, but I think it is related to investment into the ecosystem. So that would be like a super high level. I think more granularly, I think we would look at on-chain traffic in totality across all blockchains and kind of identify those major ones and increase coverage there, where we can get to 100% coverage of the top 5 to 10 major chains with a refresh rate that is essentially block for block, and then incorporating major social media as well. If we can get there within the span of a year, 18 months, then I think we'll have been really successful.
Trust is an interesting point here because essentially, depending on the framing of who controls this, if this was under the control of a nation state, people would classify it as this is the surveillance state. So how is it different under a decentralized control in Bittensor versus if a nation state was doing this or a government was doing this?
Yeah, I think that a couple of things here to comment on is one, we're operating on open source intel. So any data we collect is available for the public to consume. They just don't know how to consume it. And maybe they don't know how to correlate it. So it's not necessarily private information. It might surprise people how much information about them is already out there, but regardless, that information is out there. And so I think that, we talk about surveillance state. It's like there's immediately this privacy concern, and I don't want to like tap into that, as I don't want to like explore, how we breach privacy or anything like that. We want to keep private information private, and public information we want to bring to light in a way that makes sense. And so that's really, like, as far as surveillance goes, I mean, I think that's the limiter for us, is like we're only operating on open source intel. As far as the like kind of collection and correlation of that data, though, that intelligence information, um, that's where the distributed nature of Bittensor comes into play, where it's not that Tensora has this private, like, access to information that no one else has. It's like, this is fully decentralized. The miners are the ones participating in creating this. And so that is a shared resource, and it's open. It's like, really anybody on the subnet could query miners to do this exact same thing. And that makes it open. That makes it difficult to just kind of grab lock, stock, and barrel. If you were a government entity or you were another company, it's like, I want this relational graph. It's something that it is spread out across the miners, hundreds of people that are hosting this, and so I think that that gives us an edge as well, and it also improves quality when you have these miners that are each contributing their own piece of this puzzle. It allows us to have an output that is a higher quality output than if we were just doing this centrally internally. If we just hired a bunch of engineers to build this, I don't think we'd get the same output because we'd be bringing in our own biases, and we saw this in our prior experience in cybersecurity. We saw this a lot with the attitudes that cybersecurity professionals brought into the industry. Is they had a lot of bias that allowed them to be blinded to some really obvious facts about how malware functions, and that allows us to innovate on that. And I think Bittensor can do that exact same thing, where we challenge assumptions and we just go where the incentives follow, or we just follow the incentives rather, to see where that leads. Uh, yeah, so I think we'll have a higher quality output, we'll have a transparent output, and it'll be distributed.
And not to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but how long before you guys tap into CCTV and surveillance footage to where now the dystopian idea of social credit scores is realized?
Yeah, I don't personally have an interest in like exploring that like social credit score aspect, and so I think that would be a North Star as we build Patrol, is that everyone will have their own use case for this kind of information, but our use case is security and trust. And that's as far as we want to go with that, as we're not here to really opine on the actions of individuals or the opinions of individuals. It's more of we want to make sure that when funds go somewhere, that they aren't getting stolen, and if they do get stolen, we can trace where those funds went and identify who did it. That's the core interest for us, and that's where we think we can really build trust. Is like if you know exactly where your money's going, and you know that if you don't want it to go somewhere, that it won't go anywhere. uh, if you have that kind of trust, then that really starts to accomplish our goals internally. So, yeah, we're not interested in the level of surveillance to the point where a social credit score would ever be enacted, and I don't think that really is consistent with the culture that we have at Tensora, nor is it consistent with the really just the mission of Patrol.
Yeah, it wasn't a direct like,
Sure.
please don't take it that way. Um,
Yeah.
on the topic of like offense versus defense in this sector, which is harder to secure your privacy to where you can't be tracked or tracking people?
Um, can you rephrase that question a little bit? I'm trying to parse that a little bit.
In terms of crypto, there's things
Yeah.
like Zcash and privacy
Hmm.
coins and token
Yeah.
shielding and things of that nature.
Hmm.
So in tracking like offense versus defense, in terms of hiding versus tracking, which is harder to do?
Oh, okay. I think hiding is it is generally, I would say, easier to hide. Um, I say that with an asterisk because it's gotten a lot harder to hide. And probably it's even harder to hide than a lot of people think it is. But ultimately, uh, tracking down where funds are going is a very difficult thing to do. There's only a handful of people in the world that actually do it really well, and there's easy data to trace, but there's also some really difficult points to hit. Like you mentioned earlier about centralized exchanges, like how do you tackle that problem? It's not trivial. It's actually pretty difficult. And when you bring in like these privacy chains and all these other elements people use to hide, I think that um, if for a person that knows what he's doing, hiding is easier than tracking. Now, that being said, if you don't know what you're doing, you might think you're hiding, but you're not, and that's when people make mistakes.
And that's where patrol comes in. They snatch those
That's where
people
Patrol comes in. Yep.
up. Well, Garrett, it's been real fun talking to you about this. I have one last question for you
Sure.
here. What advice do you have for best security practices, whether that be generalized to the broader crypto ecosystem or Bittensor specifically? What are some key points people need to know about or think about with
Yeah, I
security?
mean, this might seem like just, I guess, kind of simple or obvious to some folks, but I think that it's often overlooked is just manage your keys, know where your keys are at all times, and don't expose keys where they don't need to be. Like I know it's really convenient to have access to them really quickly, but um, even going so far as to using cold wallets and using like a ledger wallet or even just the simple like just print off your keys on a piece of paper and lock it in a safe or something. That I think for most people that is the number one thing you can do for your security. And it's a tale as old as time that that's the best way to handle keys is to use these other tools and practices to be kind of air gapped. But it's often forgotten because people are um, always tempted by the convenience of keeping your keys readily accessible on your laptop. And I would just advise people to just be careful about where you keep your keys. And I would also recommend, if you are using keys on a regular basis, separating kind of a hot wallet versus a cold wallet. Like, keep your nest egg somewhere safe, and then the funds that you need to use on a daily basis, like let that be kind of segregated from your primary wallet. Again, none of this is really going to be super exciting or new to most people, but it's a good reminder, because it can be tempting to just have everything right at your fingertips all the time.
Well, Garrett, it's been quite the insightful conversation today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun.